When we were kids, we all had a pretty simple idea of fairness, right? If someone broke your toy, they had to pay for it. If someone took your cake, they had to give it back. It was pretty straightforward. As we got older, things got more complicated, but the core principle remained. If you make a mistake, you fix it. If you do something wrong, you pay for it. But imagine a world where fairness is taken to a terrifying extreme. A world where if a surgeon fails to save a life, his hands are chopped off. Or if a builder builds a house and the homeowner's child dies, the builder's own child is executed to balance things out. It sounds like a horror story, but this was the law in Babylon nearly 4,000 years ago, and the person who created it was a king named Hammurabi. When we hear about Babylon, we usually think of grandeur, majestic cities, magnificent hanging gardens, the first astronomers, and rightly so. But to achieve such an orderly society in a chaotic time, King Hammurabi decided there had to be rules. Not just any rules, but rules carved in stone, hard and unchangeable. His code of laws had nearly 300 articles, and its original purpose was noble, to protect the weak from the strong. But the way it did it is what makes us shudder today. At its core was the principle we call an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. At first glance, it seems fair in a way. You blind me, I blind you. You break my teeth, I break yours. Fair and square. But here's where the problem begins. Hammurabi's justice doesn't apply to everyone equally. It depends entirely on who you are in society. In Babylon, there were three main classes: the rich and nobles, the common people, and finally the slaves. And the law code treated these three groups in three completely different ways. Take the blinding fight earlier, for example. Case 1. A noble blinds another noble. Result: the person who made the mistake will also be blinded, an eye for an eye. Case 2. A noble blinds a commoner. Result: the noble is unharmed. He only has to pay a fine. Essentially, the commoner's eye has been converted into money. Case 3. A nobleman blinds a slave. Result: the nobleman only has to pay the slave owner half of the slave's value. The slave's eye is not even considered a body part. It is just a damaged piece of property. You see the problem? This isn't a law to create equality. This is a law to remind people of their place. It says the lives and bodies of the rich are priceless. The lives of the common people have value. The lives of slaves are just property. That's how it keeps society stable, by making the lower classes afraid to touch the upper classes. But the most haunting law, the law that most clearly shows the cold thinking of the Babylonians, is about construction. Put yourself in the shoes of a builder in Babylon. You build a house, you try your best, but maybe because of bad materials or some mistake, the house collapses. If the homeowner dies, you will be executed. That's bad enough. But if the collapse kills the homeowner's son, then the law will come to your house, take your son, and execute him. Stop and think about it for a moment. A child who had done nothing wrong had to die because of his father's mistakes in his work. Why such an absurd rule? Because in the Babylonian mind, everything had to be balanced. If one son died, another son had to take his place. The family was seen as a unified whole, and the blood debt of one could be paid by another in the family. Can you imagine living there? A society where you not only have to worry about yourself, but also fear that one mistake you make could bring disaster to your entire family. Where an accusation from a neighbor could put you in a life or death ordeal, like being thrown into a river to see if the gods decide whether you are guilty or not. That was Babylon under Hammurabi. A highly orderly, disciplined society, but built on a foundation of inequality and extreme fear. People obeyed the law not because they believed it was right, but because they were terrified of the punishments. And when you create a society with iron discipline, a society where people are used to obedience and violence, that society becomes very good at one thing. And that is war. The same cold mind that created the Code of Hammurabi commanded the Babylonian army. The ruthlessness and discipline honed at home were now ready to be unleashed beyond its borders. And when that war machine was set in motion, it would carry with it all the cruelty that had been carved in stone to be unleashed upon other peoples. So we have a society run by fear and a rock-solid code. A society where everyone knows their place and the consequences of stepping out of line. Now the question is, how does a people so disciplined and ruthless go to war? The answer is actually very simple. They fight the same way they live. Organized, efficient, and merciless. Admittedly, ancient warfare was brutal everywhere. There were no Geneva Conventions, no concept of prisoners of war. The goal was often to plunder, pillage, and capture. But the Babylonians and their successors took that brutality to a new level. They turned it into a science. For them, war is not just about glory or revenge. War is, above all, an economic activity. Consider, Babylon was a great city built in the middle of a barren land. They had clay to make bricks, they had dates to eat, but they lacked almost everything else. They had no good wood to build great structures, no precious stones to decorate their temples, no metals to forge weapons. All of those things were in other lands, belonging to other peoples. And what was the quickest way to get them? By force. The Babylonian war machine was a perfect reflection of their society. The army was not a chaotic mob, but a tightly organized structure. The foot soldiers, the archers, and especially the fearsome chariots, all moved as a unified unit, obeying the king's orders with absolute obedience. The discipline instilled by the Code of Hammurabi was now manifested on the battlefield. And they did not fight with weapons alone. They used an even more terrifying weapon, terror. Their goal was not simply to defeat a city. Their goal was to make that city suffer so much that neighboring cities, hearing the news, would tremble and surrender without a fight. Imagine you live in a city under siege by the Babylonians. They will cut off all supplies. Food will run out, and people will starve. Then they will use giant siege engines to break down your walls, and when the walls fall, hell will begin. The soldiers will storm in, loot everything of value, burn down homes and temples. Men will be killed, women and children taken away. To better understand this policy, let's look at one of the darkest and most tragic chapters they caused, the fall of the kingdom of Judah and the exile to Babylon. Around the 6th century BC, under King Nebuchadnezzar II, the Babylonian Empire was at the height of its power. The tiny Jewish kingdom of Judah attempted to rebel against them. It was a fatal mistake. Nebuchadnezzar led a huge army to besiege Jerusalem, the capital of Judah. The siege was long and brutal. Inside the city, people died of starvation and disease. Finally, the Babylonians breached the city walls. What happened next was more than a massacre. It was an attempt to wipe out an entire culture. Nebuchadnezzar's soldiers burned the city to the ground. And most importantly, they destroyed Solomon's temple, the holiest site, the spiritual heart of the Jewish people. Imagine how it must have felt to see the temple of the God they believed in reduced to ashes. It was a devastating psychological blow. But the cruelest policy was yet to come. The Babylonians did not kill everyone. They had a smarter and more cruel strategy, mass deportation. What did they do? They took away the most important people in Judah's society. The king and his family, the priests, the prophets, the scholars, the skilled craftsmen, the soldiers, everyone who had the potential to lead or rebuild society. Tens of thousands were forced to leave their homeland. Think about the insidiousness of this plan. By taking away the brains and backbone of a people, you leave those who remain powerless to resist. They become a disoriented, broken, easily ruled mob. Meanwhile, you gain a pool of talented manpower to serve your empire in Babylon. And so began the tragic journey into exile. Thousands were bound in chains, forced to walk hundreds of miles through the scorching desert to Babylon. Many died along the way. Those who survived arrived to face a bitter reality. They were no longer citizens of Judah. They were a conquered people, at the mercy of their enemies in its magnificent capital. Their pain was so great that it was recorded in the Bible, in Psalm chapter 137, with the lamenting words, "By the rivers of Babylon we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion." For the Babylonians, the war was over, another victory recorded in the history books. But for the tens of thousands of newly captured Judahites, their own battle, a battle for survival and identity, was just beginning. They were no longer scholars or craftsmen. They were now spoils of war. They were property. They were slaves. And their story reveals a darker, more private side to Babylon's greatness. When you look at images of Babylon, what do you see? The magnificent blue Ishtar Gate, the massive walls that were said to be able to accommodate 2 chariots running side by side on top, and the towering ziggurat that many believe was the prototype for the biblical Tower of Babel. It's majestic. It's impressive. But there's one question we rarely stop to ask. Who built all of this? Those bricks did not stack by themselves. The irrigation canals that make a city flourish did not dig by themselves. Most of the great structures we admire were built by the sweat, tears, and blood of thousands and thousands of people. People who had no choice. People who had everything taken away from them, including their names. They were slaves. And the story of slavery in Babylon shows us that the cruelty of this empire took place not only on the battlefield, but also in every house, on every street of this magnificent city. So how does one become a slave in Babylon? There are 3 main paths to this earthly hell. The most common route, as we have seen, was through war. When the Babylonian army conquered a city, the survivors were often taken captive. They were living booty, evidence of the king's victory, and, more importantly, a huge source of free labor. Entire peoples, such as the Hebrews, were enslaved in this way. The second path is even more brutal because it comes from the misfortunes of life itself. It is debt slavery. Imagine you are a farmer. One year the harvest is bad, and your family has nothing to eat. You borrow money from a rich man, but you cannot repay the debt. Babylonian law was very clear on this. The creditor had the right to take your property, and if you had no property, he would take the most precious thing, your family. You might have to sell your wife, your children, or even yourself into slavery until the debt was paid, something that almost never happened. This tragedy meant that even a free citizen of Babylon could fall into slavery at any time. And the third path is the one with no escape, being born into slavery. If your mother was a slave girl, then from the moment you were born, you were the property of your mother's master. Your life was decided before you knew it. So what was life like for a slave? First of all, you have to understand that in the eyes of the law, they were not people. They were property, like a cow, a table, or a house. They could be bought and sold in the market, rented out for profit, or passed down as inheritance in wills. Clay tablets, similar to modern invoices, have been found that recorded slave sales, with prices clearly stated. To ensure that people knew who was a slave, they were often marked. This might include a special hairstyle that only slaves could wear, but more brutally. Many were branded with a hot iron into their skin, or had permanent symbols tattooed on their bodies. It was a mark of shame, a daily reminder to both them and society that they belonged to a different caste, one that was less than human. Their work was extremely varied. Many did the most grueling work, digging canals, making bricks, carrying stones for huge construction projects under the scorching desert sun. Many died of exhaustion. Others worked as servants in wealthy households. Their lives might be less physically demanding, but everything depended on the temperament of their masters. A kind master might treat them well, but a cruel master could make their lives hell. The Code of Hammurabi, which we have already discussed, has a few laws regarding slavery. For example, it prohibits masters from killing their slaves. Sounds humane, right? But if you read it carefully, you will see that the reason behind it is not because they value the lives of slaves. The reason is because slaves are valuable property. Killing your own slave is like breaking a valuable object. The law only intervenes to prevent the needless destruction of property. If you kill someone else's slave, the penalty is the same as damaging someone else's property. You just have to pay a sum of money. And was there any hope of escape? Very little. Escape was considered a very serious crime. Anyone who helped a slave escape was executed. Society was encouraged to participate in slave hunting. If you saw someone who appeared to be a runaway slave, it was your duty to capture and turn them in. The whole society became one giant prison. Try to put yourself in their shoes again. A talented craftsman of Jerusalem, now forced to use his own hands to build temples for the gods who defeated his people. Freedom, honor, family, homeland, all gone. Only a scrappy existence, ruled by people who see you as nothing more than a tool. This oppression is not just physical. It is also mental torture. You are forced to live in a foreign culture, to bow to the gods of your conqueror. And the Babylonian religion, the one that created the temples the slaves were forced to build, has its own secrets, the rituals and beliefs that shaped such a powerful and ruthless empire. It is a complex, powerful spiritual world, and to outsiders, it is also strange and depraved. When a slave in Babylon looked up, what did he see? He saw giant ziggurats reaching up to the sky. He heard the priests praying to the gods who had given their masters the power to conquer and enslave them. Who were these gods, and how did the Babylonians worship them? Every empire in history believed that they had gods on their side. For the Babylonians, this was more than just a belief. It was the entire operating system of their world. Their supreme god was Marduk, who defeated chaos to create order. The goddess Ishtar was both the goddess of love and beauty and the fierce goddess of war. Every aspect of life was ruled by some god. But their world was not just about gods. It was also full of demons, spirits, and invisible forces. For the Babylonians, disease was not caused by bacteria, but by a demon. A bad harvest might be the result of an angry god. Their lives were an endless negotiation with the supernatural. And to negotiate, they needed experts, priests. The priests of Babylon were not just priests, they were also scientists and prophets. They believed that the gods were always sending messages, and it was man's duty to read them. This is why they became the first astronomers in history. Observing the stars and planets was not just for fun. For them, every movement in the night sky was a message from the gods, a prophecy about the future of the king and the empire. Astrology for them was a serious science. But they had other, more sinister ways of reading the will of the gods. One of the most popular methods was divination through animal organs. When a king wanted to know the outcome of a battle, or whether he should start a building project, the priests would sacrifice a lamb, usually a sheep. They would then cut open the animal and study its liver. The shape, color, and patterns on the liver were said to contain the gods' answers. Imagine a decision that would affect thousands of lives being made based on the reading of a lamb's liver. That was the Babylonian world. However, no Babylonian ritual has been as controversial and as widely covered as one said to have taken place at the temple of the love goddess Ishtar. It should be clear, this story comes largely from outsiders, especially the Greek historian Herodotus, who was fond of sensational stories. But the story he told shaped the world's image of Babylon for thousands of years. Herodotus wrote that every Babylonian woman, regardless of her wealth, had to do something once in her life. She had to go to the temple of the goddess Ishtar, sit there, and wait. She was not allowed to go home until a strange man came and threw a silver coin into her lap, saying, "I pray to the goddess Ishtar to bless you." Then the woman had to follow the man and have sex with him. The coin was considered a sacred offering to the temple. It is a shocking story. Even today it is hard to believe. Why would a society have such a practice? Some believe it was a ritual to honor a fertility goddess, to bless the land and its people. But many modern historians believe that Herodotus misunderstood or exaggerated the story. It may have been a minor ritual, or it may not have happened at all. But the historical truth is perhaps less important than the impact of the story. It was accounts like these that imprinted on the minds of other peoples, especially the Jews living in exile, an image of Babylon as a place of decadence and sin, a city of sin. And now let's take a step back. We have seen a set of laws built on cruelty and discrimination. We have seen a war machine that conquers other peoples for their resources, We have seen the lives of slaves, the victims of those conquests. And finally, we have seen a religious system that, to outsiders, seems strange and corrupt. All these pieces together create a powerful image of Babylon. In the Bible, Babylon is more than an empire. It becomes a symbol of human arrogance, of a materially powerful but spiritually empty empire, a place of oppression and sin. That is why hundreds of years after its fall, people still speak of the fall of Babylon the Great. What remains of Babylon today is a dusty ruin. But its story, its dark secrets remain. It is a reminder that behind every great work, every glorious empire, there may be a story of injustice, of pain, of forgotten lives. Babylon showed that the desire for absolute order can lead to absolute cruelty, and that the mightiest empires can be built on a foundation of tears and chains. History is always a mirror. Looking at the story of Babylon, from their laws, wars, slavery to their beliefs, do you see a shadow of our world today somewhere? I would love to read your thoughts in the comments. Your discussion is what makes history come alive. If you find this video valuable, please share it with your friends and subscribe to my channel to continue uncovering more secrets of the ancient world. Thanks, and see you again.